Thanks again for the introduction. Thank you everyone for the invitation, and I'm really excited to talk today about this presentation. The title is Integrating Data Science and AI Methods in Multidisciplinary Research to Make Discoveries with Social Impact. So I'll try to go over a little bit about our group research and some of the works that we having been done and something that also we are thinking about doing in the near future. Yeah, my name is Felipe Vecchietti. I'm currently a postdoctoral researcher at the Data Science for Humanity group at the Max Planck Institute for Security and Privacy in Bochum, Germany. I just joined last month, but our group is moving from the Institute for Basic Science in South Korea, that's similar to the Max Planck in Germany, but in Korea. And we had our data science group there, and now I joined Director Myung Cha that joined the Max Planck Institute for Security and Privacy, and they're moving with our group to Germany. Most of the people in this picture came here, and I chose a picture from the last cherry blossoms in the campus in Kais. There's a beautiful campus there, and this was our last group picture from the cherry blossom last year. We still need to get one here in Germany. And a particularity of our group is that Professor Cha is associated with the computer science department there, but our group was actually very diverse. We had people from different backgrounds, and we also have collaborations with people with diverse backgrounds. And that was enhanced after we went to the Institute of Basic Science. So for example, we have people also from electrical engineering. That's actually my background. We have people from neuroscience. We have like people from law, from physics, geography, economy, journalism. So like when you see like all these different, you know, to see like what actually do you do in your group. But actually today I hope like to clarify some of this research. And we come from a definition of data science that we consider data science actually as an interdisciplinary field, and where we use like different scientific methods and algorithms that can come from different fields to extract knowledge and insights from data. And with that, we try to give sensible answers. So for example, our PI, Professor Cha, her background is actually network science. And she really like used a lot of the concepts that she learned during her PhD network science to apply to social media. And we really like think that this integration with different areas are very important. But also there are many challenges in doing that in data science and doing that in an interdisciplinary research field. One is the heterogeneity. You have like data from multiple sources, from multiple modalities, how you handle that, how you merge them, how you get sense that. Now, especially like during these times, you have the volume of data, you have too much data, how you analyze that, how you do that like in a way that's computationally efficient. And also we have like this all these different aspects that you should handle when you're doing this data science implication, and also really, really important which research questions we want to answer from that. And how it started for us, especially in our group, was in this paper that was the Measure User Influence in Twitter, the Million Follower Fallacy. And this paper, I think now is 11-year-old, and was of the first papers that try like to check the engagement and try to define an engagement, because the question was like, if I have 1 million followers, what's the engagement that I generate from that 1 million followers? And was showed that it's not only the quantity of followers that you have, but the engagement that you can have, like how many likes you can get, how many answers you can get. And this is something that now is really like something that's really common, but at that time was something that was really influential, this study and how this was made. So it was the first aspect of trying to integrate this data science, network science to the social media data. And then we also got to work with trying to integrate data science and misinformation. And we try to get like this network science and try to integrate with misinformation. And in this study that's more like also 11-year-old, we observed that how this misinformation propagate in the social media. And it was like seen that the way that rumor propagates in the left is different than the way that like a non-rumor propagate in the social media in that aspect. And in that sense, it's because like people that like go and see these rumors, sometimes they do not want to share because they do not know about the veracity, or sometimes they check that that can be a misinformation, but they do not actually actively engage in sharing that. So feel like people share that misinformation patterns, but they are more like people that consume that. While for non-rumors, usually you have more organic patterns in the diffusion of this data in social media or in other platforms. And also, like if you check about insights of this data, we can see that like when we analyze the traits of these humors, that like these time space traits, we see that like humors have different specific time space traits compared to facts. For example, in the first row, you see that rumors actually, even they propagate differently in the network, they keep like being shared over time, while facts usually they have like a big peak at the beginning and then they vanish, probably because that was something that already like lost this relevance in time, but something that actually have a different pattern of that. And from that we can have some insights also like on how we can start to treat this misinformation, because we see that like for the patterns on the top, debunking that misinformation in the golden time or before the peak here is very important to like really reduce and like not being shared anymore. If not, they're still like be going to be shared over time. And also another insights that we made in another paper is that regarding fact check. And you try to check like if fact checking actually help the users to correct their views. And actually is true if like depending on how we do the fact checking with people, but if we show the fact checking for the people with a news or with like some misinformation fact, it makes like the people try to evaluate their instance, like they reevaluate their judgment and they say like, okay, now I should reevaluate and not be really radical my attitude or not believe that much on that now that I'm seeing this fact checking message. But also like it was important to see that when we try like to check that, the design of the fact checking message, like how the user get this fact checked, how it showed to him, and also their initial view is going to really influence how they affect actually after they have and they are shown this. And this all like research, this background led to what we did in the pandemic that was a facts before rumors campaign. And in this campaign, actually, we checked that a lot of misinformation start to go out during the pandemic, especially like, for example, uh, people should not take the vaccine, or if they take chloroquine, it's going to be a medicine for that. And that was going to share a lot. But the way that it was shared, it was in a different time scale in different countries. So the idea that I had, like, okay, if there is something that's happening in one country, this misinformation, then we get that fact checked and translate the fact check for different language and try like to do this fact checking for other countries, maybe before the rumor arrived there. And this was like tested for 20 languages, and we tried to apply that to 151 countries, and we had like 50 volunteers working on that. And this actually was shared like around like 50,000 times, more than that. We had the site, and we see that like we tried, and this was really effective to reduce this impact of infodemic and checking fact checks like before these rumors arrived. And there was a lot of different and really interesting takeaways that we also got during that project, that actually like some like misinformation was different in different countries. People believe in different things. And this was like actually very interesting when we're actually trying to do this fact checking and trying to like to actually arrive and fact check before some misinformation arrive in some country. But also we find some correlations that the GDP per capita of some country had really a big influence in the mean exposure during this infodemic. And what this means is that like there was a larger risk of exposure for low GDP countries. And we can have like different ways to analyze this data. We can see about level of education of this country, but also like how this affect. But we also found this correlation that these low GDP countries had a larger risk of exposure for this misinformation. And another really thing that's very important when we check with these facts before rumors is that users, they have a much lower exposure to fact checks when compared to the number of rumors that they receive. Actually, when they are in social media, they receive a lot of rumors, but only a few of them are fact checked. So like we're thinking, how actually should we prioritize this fact check? Like which news should be like fact checked and how we should actually do that. And we still like do not have a clear answer, but one of the things that we claim is that actually we should prioritize some claims that are perceived to be believable. And I think like here is the first places that we think that some methods like from artificial intelligence and machine learning can also be applied, because you can possibly integrate this to actually have a priority of these rumors and the ones that should be like fact checked very like rapidly, because depending on the capacity of the rumors that we can fact check, we should take into consideration. But actually with the amount of information that we have right now, how fast they spread is something that still is very critical when we are developing these methods, because the exposure is much larger than the one for fact check. Not only like we had these works trying to go from data science and misinformation, but we also try to integrate different disciplines. And here we also have like collaboration with people that comes from a law background. And what we wanted to do in this research is that try to answer like get the public's perception on this online misinformation. For example, one of the questions like who people consider responsible for online misinformation. So when they receive some like online misinformation, who they consider responsible for the creation of that post, for example, or who they consider responsible for the prevention of that post, or who they consider responsible for the dissemination of that post. And from that, we have like different entities, for example, if they consider other users, or like if there is some group of interest in that content that actually responsible for that, if it is politicians, if it's social media, if it's new media, and if it's government. So I wanted like to get these perceptions on this aspect. And one finding is that actually for the responsibility, the public actually tends to like assign a lot of responsibility to different groups. So actually, for example, for the creation, they assign responsibility to interest groups, but also they assign responsibility to politicians. They also assign like responsibility to people, to this news media. Is really like actually many entities that they assign responsible for that. And the same kind of like pattern goes for dissemination and also like, but for prevention, for example, you have that the people actually have a public perception that actually the social media should have is the most like responsible for that online misinformation in that, or the news media is the more responsible in that scenario. So this was very interesting findings that later we wanted to check, like, okay, now that we check like who probably is responsible for that, who actually people blame for that online misinformation. And if you go for who people blame for that online misinformation, they actually, if you check about the spectrum of conservatives and liberal, if you have like someone that is a Democrat, when they are to put blame on someone for that online misinformation, for that false information, they blame conservatives. And if you get Republicans, they actually blame Democrats. So one actually is putting the blame on the other one when they get. If you check like independent people, they try to be more neutral, but they even blame a little bit more conservatives in that aspect. That's a result that also makes sense. But that was very interesting to check that they blame each other. And it's also, I think, go a little bit in making the parallel with results that Jonas presented earlier, that you have this curve that both of them are actually like responsible somehow for this misinformation in some sense. So it's interesting to see that they blame each other in this aspect. So yeah, I just wanted to give like this work a little bit in misinformation. And I think like right now in our group, we are doing more research on that, but also related to large language models. I think Ventel is going to talk a little bit about that and about how like nowadays with large language models in the information and with bias in these large language models, how this also affects this data science and misinformation. And basically we try to use these data science techniques, analyze this big data and get to this aspect. And going on that direction, I also want to present some of the works that we have using novel machine learning, artificial intelligence techniques. And here we also like can say that like, okay, machine learning and the artificial intelligence as the way that you're talking about is just a mathematical methods inside this data science framework. But I also want to highlight that we are trying to generate like and create architectures that can treat different modalities of data. You can also like try to check how to extract effective representation of this data that can be multimodal and can be really hard to get effective representations, and also use these models to get predictions to give these sensible answers. And another thing that you're challenging is to creating explainable AI architectures. And I want to say that we also have works that check it how, like, if we have explainable AI methods, how it affects the responsibility of the stakeholders when you talk about misinformation or other things. For example, if you have a model that gives you like the false claims, how actually they put the responsibility, and actually this explainable AI methods gets a lot of paradox scenarios. I'm not going to talk about today, but I saw that there was a previous discussion about this topic. I'll be happy to talk about that later. And one like application that we did and was very successful is using actually this machine learning, AI, and data science methods combined with geography and economy. So we use like satellite images to measure urban green space in different cities. So get the satellite image, and then we get like the maps of urban green space, and we try to get different correlations. For example, we got that the correlation, especially for the top 30 GDP like countries, that children in greener countries are more happier and satisfied with life. And always when Mia like presents this data, she presents that Korea is actually the worst country. So they have like the worst correlation here. But for example, countries like Finland and Liechtenstein, they have like really a good ratio here for urban green space and also the happiness of their children in this point. We also try to apply these satellite images to do a human-machine collaboration approach for AI. meaning that we have actually people that label this data, or they get satellite images and they need like to rank this data of like something that's really urbanized or something that's really like green and not urbanized, and they try only to get these clusters. From this cluster we get all the satellite data, we try to like cluster the data on that, and from that we try to measure economical indicators from this data, and something that like we try to put the also people from another research fields in the meaning not only rely on the data but we also like have this human machine collaboration, and the result of this human machine collaboration is that we could get the first map with economical indicators for North Korea. And with that, like if you check on the top right here on B, you can see that's the image from the night view from North Korea, and you see that there's like a big white here in Pyongyang, that's the capital, but it's very hard to get the economic indicator of the other parts. But if you get the satellite image here on A, you can get that like in the right part here, for example, you have some spots where there are some industrial sites being developed, and you can get that from the satellite image, and some like thing that they are developing their economy in that site, but something that only for the light image data you cannot get, and something that you do not have access because these economical indicators of North Korea are not available in this aspect. And this is something that I've been working on. It's not that much related to misinformation, but the Nobel Prize for this year for chemistry have been on David Baker for the University of Washington and two researchers from the Google DeepMind. And they try to use this AI to combine with proteins. And I think that's also relevant because we're talking about the COVID-19. And if you have next pandemic, we should combine also not only like trying to reduce the effects of the pandemic, but trying to get quicker to something like a vaccine development or something like that. And we train language models not only for natural language, we also train language models for proteins, and we try to use that in reinforcement learning feedback that we give something to improve. For example, we want a vaccine that's more effective, and then we train that, and then we found out that actually using this policy and use these large language models to get mutations for this protein sequence, we could get proteins that went in the lab and were expressed better. There was a better affinity, so something that we can accelerate is development. And something that I'm very interested in also is just getting generating antibodies directly from the structure of the virus. So if you know the structure of the virus, if you know the problematic like part of the structure of the virus that we can actually target to neutralize, we can try to just use that to generate an antibody that directly neutralize that virus. And we're using a lot of geometric deep learning combined with chemistry. And we also are using a lot of graph neural network and use a lot of different techniques. For example, AlphaFold Bayes that was responsible for the Nobel Prize. And we get like also results on that we're currently testing the lab in Korea with our collaborators. And finally, we also have like neuro-inspired AI. We have a lot of like now in our team, neuroscientists, and we have like physicists, neuroscientists, and computer scientists work together in this project. And this is one of the papers that we had that was presented in the NeurIPS 2023. And then what we did here is that there are a lot of these nonlinear activations in AI architectures, and usually they are based like on some intuition from the computer scientists, and they're tested and they get the performance. But we just realized that all these nonlinear activations was actually really similar to the way that the brain worked. And the brain worked, and they had some hyperparameters on how the brain worked here in the activation. And if you control these hyperparameters, actually can get all the other nonlinear activation functions that are actually currently in the literature for artificial intelligence. And something that's really interesting is that depending on how you control these parameters, you control the memory of this system, this memory of the large language model. Depend on the nonlinear activation, you just have short-term memory. If you like change the way that you activate, you start to have long-term memory and it can start to memorize patterns. That's very interesting, and we're trying to apply that also in large language models. How can you apply that to have like better explainability, to know the memory, and also like if you're applying different applications, for example, using that for classification of different information, how we can get that for information that can be memorized or not memorized. Finally, I want to conclude my talk saying that like our group is really like interested in interdisciplinary research. We want to integrate data science, AI with the social science, and we like also think that this will be like crucial to effectively tackle misinformation. And especially right now, the information dynamics in social media and the internet is changing really a lot. We have a lot of challenges on that regarding like this infodemics, this amount of content generated, and like all these particularities of the popular networks. And we should like really find ways to tackle that. And also finally is that we see a lot of people trying to apply these AI methods, but not being integrated with researchers from other disciplines. And we think that like that's a big problem because like for making this fundamental discovery or to creating these tools that we have like a direct positive social impact, we really like to talk with each other to get that. It's not only about the generating the methods, and we know that we have methods that are really flexible, we can apply, but to use them in the right way and to tackle the right scientific questions, you need this close collaboration. And I want to finalize with a picture of my hometown, Rio. So from next week, I'll be there for the Christmas holiday and a small change of weather. And my home is on the left there. So I'll be there pretty soon. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Of course, we all are waiting for the time of Christmas, but I guess Christmas in Rio are really nice. But now it's time for questions. I can't see any questions on in our chat, so maybe there are some questions here for you. I encourage all. Jonas, please.
A general question. Well, thank you. First of all, it's very interesting. So nice to get an overview over all the things that happen in your lab. And my first question is kind of connected to that. Since the lab seems to be unusually diverse,
Yeah.
and I'm just wondering, I want to try to learn from, how you structure collaboration in the lab. What is the structure? How do you go ahead with it? How do you create cohesion within such a diverse group?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question because like our group comes originally from computer science. And because of the nature of the research with social media, we naturally had a lot of collaboration with people from culture technology, from like law, from like psychology. And we had a lot of this, but after we went to the IBS, the Institute of Basic Science, what changed is that we are also in a place with a lot of basic science. One of the feedback that we got when we get to our evaluation was that we're not actually collaborating with people from the basic science. We're actually collaborating with different people from basic science. And we changed the structure of our lab that actually right now, each postdoc actually not only has their research, but they have their collaboration with the different, like with the social science, with the basic science. So everyone has a clear direction on that. And this also facilitates the way that we communicate, because each postdoc or each PhD student that leads a project, you have this time that you spend to communicate effectively with people from different sciences. For example, in my case, for biology, it takes like 6 months for you to effectively communicate with them, understand the questions, and do research. So I think like that, the way that we organize the lab with these different parts and focusing on getting like some strong collaborations and finding effective ways to communicate is like an interesting and unique part of our of our lab. And the other things that Mia is very like interested in research questions from different disciplines. So once you see a research question that's very interesting, really looking forward for the student to go and like get the opinion on that and see that we can collaborate, or if you have an idea to apply that in any way.
Really encouraging you to explore different directions.
Yeah, if the research question is interesting, yes.
Yeah. That's good.
Other question?
What part of future of this research are you excited about? Because I guess you are continuing it, and I'm excited. I want to know what you're excited about.
Yeah, I think like from this aspect, when we moved to the Max Planck, we wanted to go more deep again in the misinformation and the fake news. But we now started in a way that we have a lot of large language models. So I feel that like we still do not have an answer on how to, because the large language models and these big models are a threat, but they can also be applied to probably like try to mitigate. And I think that's something that we have been discussing a lot on how to do that. And another thing that I'm really interested at these days is that actually like from the perspective of generation of this model, you can generate novel research ideas, but that it's really hard to see like if that's a good research idea or not, or how these models can be used to accelerate these research ideas or not. So like if you do that correctly, actually probably can accelerate research much faster. But if you do it wrong, probably you're just going to put a lot of more like misinformation in our papers and in our database, and going to have a lot of things that are just like being noise to that data set. And we're going to need to solve later again. It's going to be another infodemic, but from like the research perspective, because we have like a lot of papers that are LLM generated or from research questions that do not translate for something that have any social impact.
I also have a question because you were talking about this use of AI when AI is used to generate possible antibodies based on the virus. So I was thinking, do you think that there could be analogous use of AI for generating some kind of, let's say, new interventions or ideas of this kind of antibodies in the space of misinformation? Because right now, of course, AI is used as a tool, but maybe but we use it to for instance reason out people out of conspiracy theories or something like that. But maybe AI can so use to invent something that does not come into our mind right now. Do you see such application, or still you think that we don't know enough to really?
Yeah, that is a very good question. I think we're still not there yet. From the AI perspective, I think we can generate a lot of candidates for these interventions, or this like being medical intervention, or this being new molecules, or this being new proteins that can be used as a drug. I feel that we really lack still the capacity of kind of like evaluate this before we try to apply, or like if you have like some filtering techniques of something that it can work out in the lab, or it can work out in clinical trials, or if you can go ahead and go a step further, because then you go to the step further, going to see like this was generated by AI. Who wants to volunteer for that intervention? So I think like one of the points when I mentioned the AlphaFold 2 and they getting the Nobel Prize, because I think like the most important thing of that network is not only that they're able to predict the structures. That is not the fact that's the most important. If you use that daily, the most important thing is that they're able to predict confidence on that structure. And that can be used to validate, for example, a lot of medicine in the case of proteins. Before you go to the lab, before you run any experiment, you just use this network, you get the confidence metric. If the network's really confident, usually it translates to experiments that are successful in the lab. And if they're not confident, they're not translate to success in the lab. And this, for someone that, for example, is a biologist or someone from like the medical field, it's really game changer, because before going there and trying different things, but now we go with a more confident in some aspect. And I think like if you can get these networks not only generate, but also generate this with some confidence for these interventions, I think would be the most impact. I think we're not there yet, but people are starting to understand that these are important for this effective application.
Anyone else?
How much more time do we have?
We still, I think, have five minutes. Yeah, so we have time for at least one question, if not two.
So, are you focusing, to some extent you touched on it, and I guess you're going to focus more on this, but are you researching bias within LLMs?
Yeah, we are. It's going to be probably the main talk, the next talk.
Great.
Yeah, I'm not the person to answer that, but probably can repeat the question in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, I thought so. Yeah, it's good.